They go south. They take Angelique and Jahara with them. The car breaks down. Young tells Angelique and Jahara that he killed Trey. On June 21st, the defendant was brought back to the court. Detective Russ interviewed again. He played the two portions, the conflicting portions, from June 10th and June 21st. May 11th and June 10th. Now we're on June 21st. He plays those conflicting portions, and Young maintains that he was down at Cassie's. And then he says, I love my dad more than anything in this world, and I'd rather be with him than anybody in this world. My life is much better with my dad. Being with my dad is all worth it. Being with my dad is better than being anywhere else. This is after Young is brought back from Alabama. Miss Smith told you that he was scared for his life in Alabama when he was staring into Aaron Speck's eyes, scared for his life. This is how he felt about his dad. Not scared for his life, rather be with his dad than anyone else, anywhere else. He also said in this interview, my dad was with Amanda. She stated that the whole night. Why would she try to, is she trying to change it now? Gowker and Young need Amanda to establish their alibi. On June 22nd, the day after this interview, Detective Russ and Detective Stalvey drive to Alabama, interview Gowker, make the phone calls that you heard. They go straight to Cassie's when they return home the next day to confirm that she doesn't change her story once Gowker's not there in the conversation. They arrest Young. He says, I'm sticking with my story. This is a 15-year-old who yawns when he is being arrested for murder. Detective Walker and McKinley go to Cassie's. She drives them on the route to the dumpster. The next day, Detective Russ interviews Angelique and Jahara. By fall, Gowker is in prison in Kentucky. You heard from Paul Embry. Gowker is in prison in Kentucky, and he tells Embry that the plan was to lure Trey down there, but then Gowker would do it. That they were both present for the murder, that it went too far, that Young got his swing from his old man. You heard from Jason Bierman. Gowker told him that Young gave the clothes to a kissing cousin. Told him about the older lady in Alabama, about accidentally getting released, that he talked his son into killing Trey, but he didn't have to do much persuading because he was a DNC. And then he told him his plans for this case.
It come out on the news, and it's on the news where he was telling on his son, and he said that he was going to man up and take the blame for it because he had an alibi. That he was going to try and get his son off, and then later fight his case back in court and just get hit with the perjury because he had an alibi.
So why didn't Gowker initially back in Alabama stick with the plan to take the blame? It's because he's a self-serving coward. He's arrested, he wants out. And he probably thought it wouldn't be so bad for Young. He probably didn't know it would go this far. Why did he ultimately take the blame? I don't, for a second, believe that it was out of any sort of parental duty. It's because when he was initially talking to these inmates back in 2012, he hadn't decided to take the blame. He was just boasting and trying to establish a reputation in prison. He's just there on a parole violation. He wants to be respected as a murderer. But it makes no sense that he had already established some sort of lie. His initial story is that Josh Young did it all. His story now is that he did it all and Josh Young did nothing. There is no strategic reason to come up with this middle evidence that he and Josh Young together were down there. After this, he realized what was going to happen to him. Prison inmates were willing to come forward and talk to us with no deals. They were so appalled by him that they just told us what happened. And sometimes to their detriment, as you heard. And you saw from Mr. Kristanak, who was willing to take a contempt charge, the fear that inmates have about snitching. That is what other men in prison thought of Gowker. So he realized he had to do something to survive prison. He decided to take the blame for this. I assume he thinks that makes him some sort of a prison hero. The defense thinks that Gowker is a lot smarter than we think he is. They give him a lot more credit for being able to plan this out than I think he deserves. He wasn't smart enough to concoct a plan that lasted past the first interview. Stories were already starting to crack when Josh Young went in there and inadvertently admitted to knowing what Trey was wearing. So back to the elements. How do you know that we have proven that he is guilty of murder and tampering? Well, Cassie is an eyewitness to Josh Young tampering. The defense says that she's under Gowker's control. As for many of the witnesses, this case relies largely on witness testimony, and many of these witnesses were telling partial truths. And your job of the jury, as you know, is to sift through, to know what their motivations were, when their motivations were, and figure out which part of the testimony is the truth. That is your job as witnesses. So Cassie, yes, was under Gowker's influence back then. I think she was sleeping with him. I think that she seriously liked him. And that she would do what he said, and that is why when Detective Ross called her from Alabama and said, "Who killed Trey?" and Gowker's on that phone, she says, "You did, right?" Because that's what Gowker told her to say. And you saw Cassie. She is not sophisticated. She could not even figure out, now that Gowker is changing the rules, changing the story, she couldn't keep up with his change in story. She had trouble with the lie that he told her to do. She's asking him a question because she was a bad liar. When Detective Russ asked her who woke her up that night, she said Little Josh. And she said Little Josh asked her to help him get rid of the clothes. How else do we know that Cassie's telling the truth? In the phone call that Detective Russ made from Alabama, when Gowker is trying to get Cassie to talk, he says, "You're not going to get in trouble for helping with that other ship." And she knows what he's talking about. He's reassuring her that she's not getting in trouble for taking Josh Young to the dumpster. And she knows what he's talking about. The statement presupposes that there has been some tampering. How else do we know this phone call?
For what?
Well, you should talk on the phone. Let me know if there's an amble up there.
It doesn't matter. You're not going to be charged with nothing.
Are you for sure?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm just, I don't know, but, you know, I don't really do anything like this before. Really.
It's fine.
Huh?
What's up, though? You're all right. You promised me that you would.
Well, I went and showed them where I said Little Josh yesterday, and we come by with the big-ass CSI van and took some pictures of the van.
I showed them where I took Little Josh. I was the adult there. She's frustrated and worried about getting arrested. She's not faking a story for a jail phone call. How else do we know? Because Gowker messed up when he was testifying.
Yeah. You remember talking about Cassie? You remember saying that Josh told you that he woke Cassie up after he killed Trey?
Yeah, I'm the one that ended up getting her up. Yeah. But yeah.
And you ended up waking her up?
Yeah.
Okay. You remember telling them that...
I didn't tell him that.
I'm the one who ended up getting her up. I didn't tell him that. He admits that he ended up getting Cassie up. Who was initially getting Cassie up? Josh Young. They were there. This tampering occurred. And for Cassie and for all of these witnesses, you have to ask yourself, if they were lying for Gowker and under his control, then why didn't they change their stories when he wanted the story changed? When he comes in here and pleads guilty and said he did it, if these witnesses are still under his control today, why aren't they following the party line? May we approach?
Yes, come on.
Statement that changed was when Cassie brought Gowker into the tampering. She initially told Detective Russ that Josh Young woke her up. On April 4th, 2013, she tells Detective Russ that Josh Young was there one of the times. Why did that change? I'll tell you why. Back in 2011, she liked Gowker. She wanted to minimize his involvement. It was a minor part of the story to her because Young was the one who had gone to the dumpster with her. Now, 2013, he's been in prison for 2 years. Affections have changed. She now tells his role in it. It's not because she's under his control. You can tell she's not under his control because she's not telling the court what he wants the court to think. You heard from John. You heard Detective Russ tell you how on May 15th, when he was trying to talk to John in front of his house, John was sweating and shaking because he knew what had happened, and he knew he was lying to the police, and he was freaking out. John Robertson is not someone who would be able to amble into a courtroom and commit perjury without breaking a sweat. Why did he lie to police initially? Because the people living in his house had told them they were part of a murder. I suppose the defense wants you to believe that on May 15th, John was nervous and sweating for some other reason. That then Josh Gowker said, I'm going to head to Alabama. If I get arrested, that the police call you. Here's the story that you're supposed to tell. And then 2 years later, after John finds out that Josh Gowker, living under his roof, was sleeping with Cassie, he's still going to say, okay, buddy, I'll maintain the story that you told me to tell 2 years ago. Cassie knows that the plan is supposed to be to tell people that Gowker did it. That's what he told them. Tell them I did it. I'll take the blame initially. But you heard John's call. John never says you, right? He tells Detective Russ in that phone call that Gowker told him the next day that little Josh killed Trey. And that Cassie told him she went somewhere and dropped off a bag of clothes in a bag. And then a couple days later, little Josh said that he hid Trey with John's old bat from when he was a kid. And that is what he told you. Remember how Gowker couldn't keep his story straight, couldn't remember what he told in the past? It's hard to remember a lie, but it's easy to remember the truth.
What did Josh Young tell you about the murder?
He told me that him and Trey went down to the ditch to smoke some weed. He asked him what time it was, and then he hit him with the bat.
If Cassie and John are assistant criminal masterminds who are fabricating testimony, they would have done a better job before they got in here of figuring out that testimony about where they slept. That testimony was a mess because that's how Cassie and John are, and that is the truth. Cassie could not remember where people slept. John remembered where people slept. You heard all that. You saw Cassie and John just being Cassie and John. All right, Jahara. Down in Alabama, Josh Young tells her, well, Josh Gallagher, I think, probably brought up the story, but she says, you killed Trey, and Josh Young says, yeah, laughed about it. I beat him to death. Now, there is a discrepancy between Jahara's version of the kidnapping and Aaron's version of the kidnapping, and that has nothing to do with what you have to consider in this case. There is no evidence that Aaron was present at night in the hotel room when Jahara heard this from Josh Young. Aaron was with them for 6 hours. Now, Jahara testified that she was scared of Gallagher. Aaron testified that she couldn't tell Jahara was scared of Gallagher. Aaron testified that she was pretending not to be scared of Gallagher to get herself out of that situation. People act how they have to act when they are being threatened. And I don't know that Jahara was scared of Gallagher the entire time she was down there. These women seem to have a strange attraction to him, so she probably stayed past the time that Angelique left because this was a fun road trip for her. I don't know. It's not relevant. What's relevant is that she heard Josh Young admit to killing Trey. Angelique, same thing, in a hotel room.